Could you introduce yourself and tell us a little about your family?
I'm Kaur, and I live in New York City. And I am the mom of a beautiful 6-year-old boy named Riaan. And Riaan was diagnosed with a rare disease called Cockayne syndrome when he was 15 months old. And he recently became the first child in history to receive a gene therapy for the disease. Um, and so I'm really looking forward to sharing more about our story and our journey here with you today.
Before we discuss the diagnosis and early signs of Cockayne syndrome, could you tell us more about Ryan's traits, behaviors, activities, and daily routines?
Yeah, I mean, he's always been a very joyful, social, happy little boy. He loves interacting with people. So anything involving games, so throwing a ball back and forth, kicking, going on outings. He loves being outdoors. He loves going on adventures. He loves hotel beds. He likes his fair share of TV. He likes anything from Sesame Street to Coco Melon to Miss Rachel. So he's just a fun-loving, easy, just a joy to be around. The disease has presented with many challenges, but, it doesn't hasn't taken away his beautiful personality and his love for life.
How does Ryan communicate with you and with other people?
So he's nonverbal. He has a few words that he can say. So he says mom, mom, mom all the time now. He says bath for bath. So he has a few word approximations. But mostly, I mean, he uses sounds. So, when he's upset, like he'll cry, he babbles. But he gestures with his arm. So he'll raise his arm towards the direction of something that he might want. For instance, he rolls like a figure skater on the floor. He's an excellent roller. He rolls to the bathroom and then he'll gesture towards the tub and say, and you'll know that he'll want a bath. So it's pretty, I think parents just get very close with their children and it's pretty easy most of the time to sort of figure out what he's saying and what he wants. But he finds creative ways to communicate and he also understands a lot more than he's able to express, which we see it all the time. So that's reassuring.
When did you first notice that Ryan was not reaching developmental milestones at the same rate as other children his age?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, when he was born a little bit small. It was taking him about an hour to finish 2 ounces of breast milk. So I would pump, he wasn't able to latch on, and, so I would express the milk, and it would still take him a long time. Uh, but then we realized that he wasn't looking at us, like, he wasn't making eye contact, and at 3 months, he was diagnosed with cataracts in both eyes. And that's when we started to really worry that something serious might be wrong. And after he was diagnosed or with cataracts, he had surgeries, they removed the cataracts, he did well, and then we waited, and at that point, he still wasn't having head control at 4 months, he wasn't sitting, he wasn't standing, he wasn't walking as months went on, and we went back to the neurologist and the neurologist said, well, he had lost his vision for a few months, give him some time. We had also done quite a bit of genetic testing up at this point after he was diagnosed. And we had done panels, limited tests, and they all came back negative. So at that point, we were just thinking, okay, well, it's his vision. We just got to give him time and he'll sort of start developing typically. But that never happened. And then around a year, we did a whole exome sequencing test. And at 15 months, he was diagnosed with Cockayne syndrome, which explained the symptoms of him not being able to sit, stand, walk, talk, and feed himself.
So may not be familiar with it. What is Cockayne syndrome?
That was the first question that came to my mind too when the doctor told us the diagnosis. We'd never heard of it. I was Googling what is Cockayne syndrome, like as the doctor was telling us on the telehealth. Cockayne syndrome is an ultra rare disorder. It is fatal. We were told that Rihan's life expectancy, because he had a more severe type, was 5 to 7. But there's children that live until their mid to late teens. There's other children that have a smaller amount that have survived until adulthood. It impacts the body's ability to repair damage to the DNA and a process called cellular transcription. So, the process by which cells copy instructions um, from the DNA blueprint to make the protein that they're supposed to make. So that process is stalled during the repair process that's damaged with Cockayne syndrome, and as a result, cells die prematurely, and this really impacts neurons and brain cells and leads to neurodegeneration. And essentially, it's often described as a premature aging disorder. So children are rapidly aging; their cells are rapidly aging and dying off, um, and it impacts every part of the body. They have vision loss and hearing loss, or vision difficulties, and there's a range. It impacts kidney function, liver function, growth. Children are often very, very small. They have small heads. They're extremely underweight. A lot of them require feeding tubes and other adaptive equipment to assist with daily living. And in many and there's a range of abilities. Some children with Cockayne syndrome can talk, some can walk, some can sit, stand, others cannot. And eventually, many lose their abilities as they get closer to advanced disease.
Think of the interview, you mentioned that Riaan was the first person to participate in an experimental gene therapy trial. Could you tell us more about the therapy? Have you ever noticed any changes in Ryan's abilities, health, or quality of life since he received it?
No gene therapy for Cockayne syndrome at the time. We looked around, we researched, we were desperate for a cure. We were desperate to do something. We wanted to help and build a treatment for Rian and other children who were diagnosed with the condition. So we actually started an organization called Rian Research Initiative, which is a nonprofit here in the United States, with the sole purpose of accelerating the development of treatments. And we explored a number of options. We looked at drug repurposing, so we looked at, well, are there other drugs that are already out there that we could repurpose to help stall some of the symptoms? But our primary goal was gene therapy. We wanted to get to the heart of the problem, which is by sending a healthy copy of the gene that's mutated in his body, CSA, or ERCC8 as it's called, and put it in a viral vector known as AAV9, and essentially deliver it to the brain directly, and hope that the body starts expressing that protein and it starts alleviating some of the symptoms. Um, so that was the goal, and it took us almost 5 years to do it, and we raised $4 million. The entire project was funded head to toe, A to Z by Rion Research Initiative and our donors. And we worked closely with the scientists and the clinicians at UMass Chan Medical School and also later at Weill Cornell Medical Center here in New York City, New York Presbyterian, where Rion was treated, to get this to the finish line, essentially. So after the drug was manufactured, we also so just a real simple snapshot of the process. Gene therapy drug development it's not just you develop a gene therapy and you give it to a child. You have to first show that uh, it's effective, that there's proof of efficacy in animal models. So we tested the gene therapy vector that was created by the scientists at UMass, in mice models, in mice models of Cockayne syndrome. So these mice, they have severe Cockayne syndrome. They would die in 21 days. They delivered the vector to the gene therapy to the mice and extended their lifespan by 8.5 times. So they were living from 21 days to over 6 months. And they were eating better, they were bigger, like, there was major improvements in quality of life and also how long they lived. So but it wasn't a full cure. The mice were still, even though they were treated at birth, they were still dying earlier than typical mice, but it was a major improvement. It was extremely impressive. So after that, we started manufacturing the product, and we also simultaneously did what's called a toxicology or a safety study in rats to make sure that and these were just normal rats, just to make sure that there's no toxic events before we try to give it to a first human. Now, after that, there's a number of tests and other things that are involved. um, but we filed an investigational new drug with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to get clearance to be able to treat Rion and then hopefully down the road other children. So the FDA gave us clearance, and then Rion, and then we started the journey of of Riaan being the first child. And, as his parents, because we were sort of, I was the scientist, parent scientist all along this journey, sort of, my honorary PhD. And then once you get to the end point and it's now real and we have the drug, it became very, um, nerve-wracking. We were scared, because Riaan is now 6 and he has advanced disease and he's fragile. And although he'd never been hospitalized before and he'd been stable, we were nervous about how he would be able to handle it. Gene therapy is there have been deaths associated with gene therapies. There have been catastrophic side effects. Um, so you just don't know when it's a first in human, how that might play out. Rihanna is not a mouse. He's not a rat, right? So those are all sort of challenges. And then on April 21st in 2026, or about 3 months ago, Rian was admitted to the hospital and he received the procedure via neurosurgery. So it's called ICV. And so they drilled a burr hole in his head about this big and um, delivered the gene therapy directly into his brain ventricles. And, that, so that I guess was sort of the easy part, so to speak. And then he was monitored for several days. When he first woke up, when he was first brought to the pediatric ICU and we were able to see him for the first time, he was crying so hard and I was so scared. And as a parent, I didn't know what to expect, but, the next day he did a lot better and he started laughing and he was playing balloon volleyball and, he wasn't totally back to, back to himself just yet, but things were getting better. And then, a few days later, we were able to leave the hospital and, um, another thing that people don't understand about sort of gene therapies is, it's almost if you think of it in ways, it's similar to sort of an organ transplant. Children are placed on immunosuppression so that the body doesn't attack the vector, or have some sort of catastrophic response. So he was on severe immunosuppression, just to protect him and make sure that he was that we could deliver the vector to his body without facing any of those sort of side effects. And that, of course, is not easy on a child either. So, it's been a lot of clinical testing, a lot of monitoring, but he is such a strong boy. It's been 3 months, and, we are so proud of him. He's very resilient. We were very relieved that we had a Rion back, pretty quickly, his normal sort of personality. He was happy and, despite the immunosuppression and despite the neurosurgery recovery, and, it was we're still taking it day by day. It takes months to determine if a gene therapy is efficacious. It's not sort of a quick process. You also want to make sure that the child is completely off immunosuppression, so that you can clearly judge, what the benefit or lack of benefit is coming from. So, we've seen some exciting improvements, but we're still sort of waiting and hoping, when he sort of formally gets developmental testing again to see if there's differences from before he was treated and after. So it's a process. I mean, the gene therapy takes again, the benefits take some time to show up, if there are any, but we are hopeful. And we're also excited about getting this treatment out to other children who are waiting, in line, other families who want to get their child treated too. And it's a real honor, and a real heavy responsibility, for Rian to have been the first child. It's not, I think what people here sort of if you're not sort of into the details as much or in this world, it's sort of hard to know the differences between these various diseases and gene therapies. But Cockayne syndrome is a really difficult disease to treat. The children have because they lose their brain cells. Their brain cells die off as time goes on. And, we've seen images of Rian's brain and he has, significant brain atrophy or brain loss. And you can't get that back. Like, those are not things that can come back. What we are hoping is that what is left, we can stabilize and keep and restore and improve in order to sort of potentially improve his quality of life. And then as parents, we pray, give us more time with him. Again, it's experimental, it's hopeful. Um, we don't know if the great results we saw in the mice we'll see in Rian. but we're hopeful, and so far he's doing great.
In addition to the experimental AAV gene therapy, what types of care or rehabilitation services does Rian regularly need?
It's physical therapy 3 times a week, and he also receives speech therapy, speech and feeding therapy. Yeah, he's pretty severe, so he's not, for instance, he wasn't really able to sit for long periods by himself independently without sort of leaning against something. He couldn't stand really on his own and can't walk on his own. So he needs quite a bit of assistance, but he's very good. He's very strong, and we feel that he's getting stronger every day. And so I think, you know, we're hopeful. Let's see what happens.
At this stage, is it still too early to determine whether the potential benefits outweigh the risks?
Oh, I mean, so the first 3 months are generally the acute monitoring window, but with AAV9 or any sort of gene therapies, children are followed for at least a period of 5 years. Um, and then over time, the checks become less and less. But I think as more time goes on and we feel better about sort of the prognosis and how he is and how things are progressing. But it's again, because it's first in human, I feel like there's never a point where we can declaratively say, we're good, It's just that's part of the uncertainty of it. And that's not something that I think I fully prepared myself for, if I'm being honest. When he was diagnosed, I was terrified because I didn't know what every day would be like. I thought we'd have to take him to the hospital all the time. He'd be very sick all the time. And then I got to understand his baseline, and I became to understand what life was like, and then it was good because I had certainty. And then we did the gene therapy, and now we're back in a very uncertain world again, and I have no idea what to expect. And one thing that's really, there's a very limited number of people to talk to about this. He's the only child who's ever gotten a gene therapy for Cockayne syndrome at the moment, right? So there's nobody in the community that I can call up and be like, "Well, I'm seeing this. Do you think it's similar? Do you think it's from the disease? Do you think it's from the gene therapy?" But there are other parents of with different, children diagnosed with different diseases that have gotten gene therapies, and so we've become close, several families, and we try to sort of help each other out and share information. But even still, all of our children are so different, and all of our experiences are so different. There's children that have the next couple of weeks after started, walking or doing this or doing that. And then there's other children who've gotten really sick or had a toxic side effect, and it took, several months to recover. And it's just a range, and there's programs where the benefit is transformative, like spinal muscular atrophy and Zolgensma, right? There's the babies that are treated immediately, like, we see these it's probably one of the closest things that you could call a cure almost. And then there's others where the benefits are more modest, and there's maybe a 5% improvement or a 10%, but even that is intense and tremendous, because any change in quality of life could be very beneficial for our children. But you also have to balance the risks of neurosurgery and immunosuppression and monitoring. So it doesn't get easier. Yeah, as a rare disease parent, you're always in a world where you're making impossible choices, and sometimes you wonder if you make the right ones, and you just never know the answer.
Could you give us an overview of the Rian Research Foundation and explain what the research team is currently working on?
The initiative is the 501(c)(3) nonprofit that my husband and I founded after Riaan was diagnosed. We have a scientific advisory team that works closely with us to provide consults and advice on our programs. And we also have a board of directors that governs the operations of the organizations and helps fundraise. So it's a volunteer organization. We're very small, and every single penny that we raise essentially with very um, goes towards research. We wanna make sure that every dollar, as much as we can, is spent on getting these treatments developed. So we have multiple doses that we have developed that we manufactured in the same manufacturing run that Rian's dose came out of. So we're hopeful right now it's sitting in a freezer. We're hopeful that, with further regulatory approvals and raising additional funds to cover the clinical costs for other children to get neurosurgery and um, to stay nearby and all the medications and all the visits to cover those costs for other families. So that's what we're working on now.
Aside from research funding, what are some of the biggest challenges involved in advancing research on Cockayne syndrome?
So funding is always a challenge, but I also think, there's strategy, in terms of, it's a small community. There's not a lot of patients that are impacted, and for us, it's even smaller because there's 2 genes that are primarily mutated in Cockayne syndrome. One is CSA, which is Rian's, and the other is CSB, and CSA only represents 1/3 of the population. So we're talking about a very small group of children. So I think one of the challenges that many disease communities that are that small face is what's called, natural histories, trying to figure out what the natural prognosis is of children and comparing that to how they might respond to treatment so we can clearly delineate the differences. Um, I think there's also challenges in time. This is a life limiting disease. Our kids don't have a lot of time. Um, Even the ones that have the moderate diagnosis, tend to live until their mid to late teens. That's not a lot of time, and we wanna get to them. We wanna get them treated before they suffer significant, neuronal loss, before the disease becomes too advanced. So I think being able to move with urgency, and trying to navigate systems to get them to go faster, and to understand that aspect of it is challenging. And then I think what third is collaboration. I mean, I think there's a lot of folks in the rare disease community that work very closely together and share information between other parents who do this work and scientists and biotech, but there's not enough. There's frankly not enough. And there's, a lot of public talk about collaboration, and yet behind the scenes, it's not always easy to get groups to come together. It's not always easy to get scientists or clinicians or people from different institutions to come together. And it requires a lot of sort of heavy lifting and steering the ship from parents, um, who become drug developers like us to have to sort of move these systems and say, look, let's focus on the kids. Let's focus on the problem at hand. Like we all know we have limited resources. We all have limited capacity, but unless we get these kids treated, there's really no point in um there's no point. We have to that's the only thing that matters is getting our children treated in a timely manner and making sure that treatments are available to everybody despite their background, their economic status, wherever they may be from. Like that to me is very important. That treatments are not just reserved for the privileged few who are able to access them. I think it's so making treatments accessible to parents and families all over the world is a very important goal, but of course, that's also associated with funding and raising money, and to my larger point, because it's such a small disease community, we aren't getting that same level of interest from biotech, from pharmaceutical companies, which is part of the reason why we stepped in and pushed this forward and raised the money ourselves. But there's a limit to how much parents can raise. We don't have an endless stream of funds. It was a miracle to raise $4 million, and we're going to need, much more to continue the project forward. So those are things that I think about at night, problems that I'm trying to solve in my head, to think about how we can move forward and try to get everyone who wants to get treated.
What advice would you give to a family whose child has recently been diagnosed with Cockayne syndrome?
They're not alone, of course. There's You feel very alone and scared in that moment. And then once you become connected to the community, and there's a community of people all around the world, and there's support groups, and there's organization like ours that share the stories of families and we often are assisting newly diagnosed families with information and resources. um, it becomes easier. It doesn't the pain never goes away, but it becomes easier to learn to demystify the disease. I would tell them to learn as much as they can about the disease. I would tell them to be prepared to be advocates. It's not a job anybody wants. I would tell them that they might know more than their child's doctor sometimes. And I don't mean to suggest that the doctors don't know, aren't properly trained, but that's just the nature of rare disease where parents become very familiar with their children and their diseases and what's to be expected and what's not, and what's normal and what's not. Um, and in a way that doctors who might not see these diseases as much or ever in their careers would. So I think you have to be able to be you have to be prepared to challenge authority, essentially, when you become a rare disease parent. You have to stand up for your child. You have to fight school systems, to make sure your child gets an accommodation or gets the right learning environment to accommodate their needs. You have to fight health insurance. You have to fight your own job. I mean, life goes on. There's a lot of, but there's parents that have done this before you. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Lean on families that are also newly diagnosed or have previously been diagnosed, and never give up hope. We don't know what's going to happen next. When Riaan was diagnosed, I called a mom who had tragically lost her child to CS, to Cockayne syndrome. When he was 7, he passed away in the 90s. And she said, that child, Riaan's going to give you more joy than you've ever known in your life. And she was absolutely right. The last 6 years have been wonderful and so happy, and, like, yes, I'm grieving and I'm sad, but I'm also very lucky and privileged and happy. Like, we've had a great life together, and I tell that to new families who contact us, and they all, to my surprise, none of them push back. They all see it already in their kids. They're all like, "Yeah, we see it. He's like the happiest kid we've ever met." You know? So, I think just understanding that this isn't the end. I mean, this is a horrible, situation to be in, but there's hope, and we're lucky to have our kids. Our kids are beautiful. They're absolutely perfect, and together, I think we can do so much more, and science is advancing at rapid speeds. It's just, there's funding delays, there's regulatory delays, but science is moving at rapid speeds, and it's really exciting to see what lies ahead. There'll be even better treatments for Cockayne syndrome. I mean, we're just the first, right? We're just the first generation of gene therapy, and I'm hoping that more parents are inspired to join the effort and push the research forward, um, and also challenge everybody. You have to challenge everybody. You have to ask questions. You have to not be afraid to ask stupid questions, because that's where innovation happens. And um, I think, uh, in despair, miracles are born, and this whole story has been a miracle.
How would you like people to remember Riaan and understand his story?
Everything feels bleak. Sometimes it just takes the smile of a child to change the world. And that's really, Rian did this. He and all of his beautiful friends in the community whose stories we've shared over the years. And that's part of why we named the organization after him, because we didn't name it sort of anything related to the disease. I also didn't like I'm not for me, like, I don't think about the name of the disease too much. It's for Rian, it's for the children. How do we make their lives better? And I feel that people connect more to children, to the stories of a child. They don't feel a connection to an ultra rare disorder because it doesn't impact them. They don't know it. They don't understand or have never even heard of Cockayne syndrome. So any child, any story can really change the world. And this is our example of that. We just shared it, put it out in the world. Rian smiles, Rian stories, our hope. We had no idea what to expect. We didn't know what would happen, but we were fighting for this dream, and we fought it all the way, and we still have more to work to do, but we got there somehow. And we're a family that, my husband's a teacher, I'm a civil rights lawyer, and now I'm, caregiving at home. And, we don't come from sort of a lot of wealth, in our background. We're, a typical family, like, living in New York City, trying to make ends meet. And so I think just a reminder that with love, anything can move forward. I really do believe that anything is possible. And the love and innocence of a child can change, not only move mountains, they can send us to the moon and back.